If you want to follow along tonight, open your Bible to Job chapter 3. This is the second in what we hope will be a series of 4 lessons on this theme of grief in our life together. There are a lot of things that we do in our life together. There's a lot of joy in our life together. There are a lot of things that we celebrate in our life together, great moments that bring great joy, but there's also unavoidable grief in our life together. And someone described this chapter dark, depressing. It's a difficult chapter. Probably very few people would say, my favorite chapter in all of the Bible is Job chapter 3. I'll bet not. I'll bet it isn't. It's hard to read. In verse 25, Job said, "What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me." One of the writers that I've been kind of reading and studying, he made the comment, probably nobody's ever memorized a verse from this chapter. I'll just tell you that verse has kind of been living in my mind and in my heart for a long time. There's just something about that language. What I feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come upon me. We all have things that we think about how horrible that would be. We're watching the news or we hear people kind of talking in the foyer after church and we hear about some horrible thing and we think, oh, these terrible things that have happened to others. I hope that never happens to me. And Job says the things that I feared the most, the things that kept me up at night when I thought about them, those things have happened to me. His worst fears came true. His children died. He lost his health and his wealth. His wife told him to curse God and die. You might say everything that could go wrong did go wrong. His worst nightmare became a reality. You back up just a little bit. If you have your Bible open there, Job chapter 3, last verse in chapter 2, verse 13. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days, 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him. Notice what it says next. For they saw that his grief was very great. Have you ever been with someone like that? Have you ever sat with someone at the hospital or gone to the funeral home or sat with them days after some unspeakable tragedy? You could see it on them. You could see the weight of their grief, that it was very great. The question we're going to answer tonight, and Job's going to answer it for us, how great was his grief? You know, his friends are looking at him, and they see that his grief, we're just playing off that language. His grief was very great. How great was it? He's the one speaking here in chapter 3. And if we just listen to what he's saying, Job is telling us that his grief is so great that he cursed the day of his birth. We're going to read verses 1 through 10. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived, let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come up in the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes." Can we just start with the first 2 words in verse 1? The Bible says after this. After what? Well, I mean, you already know what. We've already studied, and you've already read the first 2 chapters of this book. After this man's life was turned upside down, after he buried 10 children, lost his worldly possessions, was afflicted with a terrible and painful disease, and his wife told him, you should just curse God and die. After all that, Job laments the fact that he was born. Later in chapter 6, the passage that was read for us tonight, focusing on verses 2 and 3, if only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery be placed on the scales, it would surely outweigh the sand of the sea. No wonder my words have been so impetuous. If you could weigh, can you imagine the weight of grief, of everything that he endured? And he says, if you could take all of my grief and lay it on the scales, if you could weigh it, it would outweigh the sand of the seas. We need to remember that Job is speaking as a man who's carrying the weight of unfathomable grief. Most of us could never wrap our mind around everything that he lost and how much he suffered. And it's from the depths of that grief that he cries out against the day of his birth. He wants that day to perish. And now I've got to use an illustration that forces me to tell you I don't know what day my birthday is. Because I told everybody in my sermon this morning it's Tuesday, and I got home and said, Tony said, your birthday's not on Tuesday, it's on Wednesday. And so I'm a man of a certain age, and I can't even remember that my birthday is on Wednesday. But it's like if I was talking, I'd be saying, you need to take the 11th out of the calendar. You can have a 10th and you can have a 12th, but from now on, till the end of time, there will never be another February 11th. Take that day out of all the days of the year. It's a terrible day. He's talking about the day of his birth. He was talking about the day that people yelled out, it's a boy. You know, there's such excitement. Now today, I understand we're living in different times. We go to the doctor months ahead of time. We have the gender reveal party, and it's pink or it's blue. We already know, but this is written at a time where they didn't have that advantage, and they didn't know until the baby arrived, and some glad shout of joy, it's a boy, and he said all that night. I pray that there'll never be another day like that day, the day of my birth, should be stricken from the calendar. If you're a person, he says, if you're a person who curses days, curse that day. He wants it to be shrouded in darkness. He hopes that no light will ever be seen on that day. No joyful cry will ever be heard on that day ever again in the future. Why? Because it didn't shut the doors of his mother's womb. It didn't hide his eyes from trouble. His grief is so great that he cursed the day of his birth. And it's so great that he wished that he had never been born. We're looking now at verses 11 through 19. Why did I not die at birth? Come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept. Then I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver? Or why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked cease from troubling. There the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. They hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. One writer was talking about that phrase, knees, no knees to receive me, no breasts to nurse me, and And the thought initially was, maybe he's just talking about his mother. Others say, no, he's talking about his father and his mother. Charles Swindoll said in Job's day, a father would be given the infant. He would bless the child as the infant was placed on the father's knee. If you can envision, the child is brought to dad, laid on his lap, and he speaks blessing over his child. And then the child would be handed over to the mother, and she would nurse the baby for the first time. And I'm not exactly sure if that's what Job had in mind, but if it is, he's basically saying, I wish that would have never happened. I started thinking about the day that our first child was born. And the first is different from all the others. I'm just telling you. They all three ended up coming by C-section, but we didn't realize that was going to happen on that first day. All I know is that she woke me up at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, I think my water broke. I didn't know you could break water. Listen, I didn't know what was going on. I was sleeping. And all I know is it was a 30-minute drive from Mount Vernon, Missouri to the hospital in Springfield. And a couple of weeks ago, there was a couple that made it halfway, had their baby in the back seat of a car at the 7-Eleven. And I thought, we better get going. And when we arrived at the hospital from about 6:30 in the morning until after midnight, she was in labor all day long. I remember at one point I said, she was so uncomfortable, honey, can I pray? I'm a preacher. Can I pray for you? She said, make it a short one. I'm in no mood for one of your long prayers. Fair enough. The doctor sometime after midnight decided that they had to do a C-section. And honestly, I don't remember all of the details. I just know that she had lost so much blood that after Macy was born, they had to take her back in for some procedure. So for about the first 30 minutes to an hour, she sat on my lap. Now, I'm the youngest of three boys. There was no babysitting in my history. There was nothing had prepared me for this. One of the ladies there at that church saw me weeks before Macy was born, and somebody tried to hand me a newborn, and I was like this. Very stiff, very uncomfortable, but that was my baby. And I didn't have any trouble at all. And I got her all to myself. She was on her father's knees. And then they brought Tawny into the recovery room. And I don't know if it was from the trauma that she had endured for nearly 24 hours, but her whole body was trembling. And I said, do you want to hold her? And she fought back tears. She said, I want to hold her, but I'm afraid that she didn't want to drop her. And I just remember leaning over and holding on to her, but putting her in Tawny's arms. And something, I don't know why this happened, but as soon as she felt that baby in her arms, her whole body stopped trembling and became very, very calm. It was amazing. And she just, as you can imagine, as some of you have experienced, she looked at that little girl with eyes full of love. And Job is describing an experience like that when he said, why did the knees receive me? Or why the breasts that I should nurse? He said it would have been better if he had died in childbirth, a stillborn child, a stillborn baby. He says something very similar to that in chapter 10, in verses 18 and 19. Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Oh, that I had perished, that no eye had seen me. It would have been as though I had not been. I would have been carried from the womb to the grave. His grief was so great, he wished he had never been born. He cursed the day of his birth. He looked back on that day and said, why couldn't I have just died in childbirth? And then he longed for death to end his suffering. I mentioned this book this morning, Victory Over Trials by Lottie Beth Hobbs. She said, have you ever sat by the bed of one so immersed in pain that he begged for the release which only death can bring? She said, if so, you can understand, at least partially, you can understand Job's condition. He's in so much pain. He's endured so much agony that he longed for death. He believed that the only hope he had remaining was that death would come and end his misery. Verses 20 through 26. Why is light given to him who is in misery? And life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than for hidden treasure, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Here's another interesting thought that comes from that book by Lottie Beth Hobbs. She said, there's a picture gallery in Italy. It portrays death coming into the midst of a group of people. If you can imagine the personification of death, there's this large crowd of people. The young and the strong run away. They see death coming and they flee. The sick, the suffering, the aged, the weary, they reach out with arms of welcome. I remember when Tawny's granddaddy was very, very sick, and the family took turns sitting with him all day long and through the night. And Tawny said one morning he woke up and he was somewhat disgusted about it. And he said, why am I still here? You know, for people who are young and healthy, and life is very happy and joyful, and there's so many exciting things that are happening and things that you're looking forward to that you hope will happen, you don't think that way. You greet each new day with excitement and optimism. You're hopeful about what God will bring. But there are others who every day is pain. I'm talking about physical pain and agony and grief and suffering. And I think Job is one of those people. And he's in so much pain that he would have welcomed death like a dear friend. There in verse 26, he summarizes his misery in 4 statements. I am not at ease. I am not quiet. I am not at rest. I am full of turmoil. Later in chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant what I hope for, that God would be willing to crush me, to let loose His hand, and to cut off my life. I am ready. That's what he's saying. I am ready to die. That's how great his grief was. Now, I want to say something about what we just read together and what we just studied together this evening. And I hope that this makes sense. It doesn't do any good for us to play at our religion. And what I mean by that, when I say it doesn't do us any good to play at our religion, I mean it doesn't do us any good to pretend that we're happier, holier, than we really are? Or to act like the pain of life doesn't really touch us in any deep or devastating way? I'm a Christian, and because I'm a Christian, I don't grieve like those who have no hope. I don't know that everybody understands that. That passage does not say that we do not grieve. It says that the quality of our grief is different. The quality of our grief is different because we know that Jesus one day will come again, and when He does, the dead in Christ will rise. We're all going to go home. We're going to be with God. We're going to be with Jesus. We're going to see our loved ones again. We're going to be together forever. But listen, I don't think that's realistic to lose a child, to lose a spouse, to have some terrible diagnosis that you know that your time in this life is short, and to act like it doesn't touch you in any way. Job is not pretending. He's not playing. And I think something that this chapter, Job 3, reveals to all of us is that even the most spiritually mature, godly people can be depressed to the point of despair. I mean, listen, this is the guy that God says to the adversary, to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There ain't anybody else like this guy. God, not Job. Job's not saying that about himself. God is saying there's something about the quality of this man's integrity and his faith. He's really special. But this man experienced great despair. And I think when we find ourselves in a situation like what Job experienced, the best thing we can do is to be honest about it. I don't understand this idea of just pushing all of our grief and pain and just holding it in. I don't read anything in the Bible that says that's how Christians are supposed to deal with their grief. Went to a funeral one time. The man lost his wife, and he's out in the foyer greeting people, and like it's a Wednesday night service. He's lost his wife. I don't think you see any of that in Job. I love what he says in chapter 7, verse 11. It should be at the bottom of your outline. Therefore, I will not keep silent. I will speak out in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. That's what we're hearing when we read Job 3. We're listening to a man who's speaking from the anguish of his spirit. He's complaining from the bitterness of his soul. It's real. It's raw. It's heartbreakingly honest. He's not pretending. He's not hiding. He's openly grieving and venting the pain of his loss. And Job isn't the first, and he won't be the last to reach that level of despondency. Jeremiah wished he had never been born. Elijah asked the Lord to take his life. And you know what all three of those men did? They all told God the truth about how they were feeling. And I think there are probably some people that need to hear this. They need to know that you can tell God what is on your heart. He's big enough to carry your grief and bear the weight of your heartache and the bitterness of everything you cry out from the depths of your despair. You know, we're going to get to this next week. But I don't think it's wise to try to educate a grieving person. People say all kinds of things that may not line up with biblical theology. And listen, sometimes what they're doing is they're just hurting. They're just expressing the hurt that they're feeling. And sometimes what we need to do is just listen to them. And understand that what they're saying is coming from a place of loss and deep hurt. And you need to know tonight That no matter what you say from that depths of despair, from that broken heart that is filled with pain, and you're crying out to God, that He's big enough to take it. I think sometimes when I talk about playing at it, read the Bible and listen to how people talk to God when they're hurting and when they suffer and when they're grieving. They're honest with Him. And you can be honest with Him. If He listened to Job's complaint, and I think He did, He'll listen to yours and He'll listen to mine. I think that's important. I think it's a healthy way for deeply spiritual people to kind of navigate through the journey of grief and loss. We don't have to pretend that it doesn't hurt. We don't have to put on a brave face. Because if people see how upset and how hurt we are, it might be an indictment of our faith. I don't think it is an indictment of our faith. I think it's a testimony to the depth and the reality of our faith. That when we are so broken, we know where to go with that. And we have enough faith in God to know we can take all of that to Him and He will understand. I don't know what's going on in your life. Sometimes in an assembly like this, there are things happening with people we don't even know that they're going through. Some of the hard things that are so painful. The whole point of this lesson, I told you last week, I'm not trying to deal with the difficult theological issues of why does God allow pain and suffering. We're trying to approach this from a simple, practical standpoint of our life together. And the message tonight is God does not want His people to hurt alone. He wants us to do life together. So I hope you know that you're with your family tonight. People that care about you, people that love you, a God, obviously, who loves you. And you can share those things with us. There might be something here, as somebody here, like I said, the weight, that burden of what you carried in with you is heavier than what you can carry alone. I hope you'll share it with us. I invite you to share it with us as we stand and sing.